Welcome to Iowa City's Other News. I'm Greg Thompson. Our show today is called Other Questions for City Council Candidates. I'm glad you're watching today. It's 1 year ago we started doing Iowa City's Other News on October 16th, 2002, and we're still here going strong. Today we're going to be talking on tape and live with all 8 candidates for the City Council races. I have pre-recorded 7 of the candidates over the last week. Karen Pease will be in the studio live at the end of the hour. I noticed watching some of the forums, the League of Women Voters and here at PATV on Live and Local, that sometimes the candidates seem to agree on a lot of things. And I tried to ask some questions that would draw out some differences. I asked candidates whether they would support a resolution telling city employees not to enforce the Patriot Act. I asked them what they thought about the process for the recent TIF programs, and I asked them a question about the mix between bicycle, pedestrian trails, and road building. So we're going to go right to that tape, and we're going to listen to 7 of the candidates that I interviewed earlier this week, and then we'll be back in about 40 minutes with a live interview for Karen Pease, and at the end of the hour, outgoing City Councilor Stephen Cantor will be here, and we'll make the Iowa City Other News endorsements. Watch these interviews. Some of the candidates answered the questions, some of them danced around it. You'll have to decide. I didn't have time for any follow-up questions, so let's go right to the tape. Okay. I'm here today with Regina Bailey, candidate for Iowa City Council in District C, to ask a few questions, as we're asking of all our candidates. And the first question, Regina, is, would you support a city ordinance directing city staff not to cooperate in enforcing provisions of the Patriot Act that may violate a citizen's civil liberties, as has been done in other cities like Arcata, California?
Well, I certainly have concerns about the Patriot Act and understand that there's a movement in the community to post warnings to citizens so they're more aware of what civil liberties may be violated as our city staff comply with the Patriot Act. So I think opening that discussion is a good thing, and I would like to hear more what direction the community wants to move on this, and if we really need an ordinance to support non-compliance with the act.
Okay. And our next question, are you happy with the process that has been used to grant some of the recent tax increment financing districts by the Iowa City Council?
I have been a little bit concerned about the process insofar as consistent applications of the guidelines that we have on record with the city. I'd like to see a more open to the public process and ensure that we are using guidelines consistently from business to business. And if we're not getting clear information as they direct their answers to those guidelines, having the opportunity to have a conversation so the community and the council really understand how these businesses are going to comply with the questions we ask them.
Great. For future city budgets, would you favor increasing the amount of money spent for bicycle and pedestrian trails by reducing funding for road building?
Well, I'm certainly a pedestrian, and I just got a bike, and it's tough to use bikes as transportations in this community with the increased car traffic. So I think that sounds initially like a good idea. I'd have to see the numbers and what the implications of that would be. But I would love to see more people commuting to work on bikes and walking to work rather than using cars. We're getting to the point where we no longer have a rush minute in Iowa City, which used to be a joke, but there are some real traffic problems around 5 and 8 o'clock in the morning. It surprised me. So yes, I think that sounds like a great idea.
I think we're up to a rush half hour now.
Yes, we are. We are. I try to avoid leaving work. I leave work at 6 just to avoid being impatient either on my bike or in my car because it's a challenge.
Yeah. Okay, and our last question is sort of a more general question, a philosophical question. And as you know, many people say that in Iowa City, political labels like radical, progressive, liberal, moderate, or conservative mean something different than what they mean in the rest of the state. Which of these terms best describes your political philosophy and why?
I identify myself as a progressive, and I think core to that is the belief in open process and open government and informing citizens about what's happening and giving access to citizens in the decision-making process. So I call myself progressive.
Great. Thanks a lot for coming on with us today, Regina.
Thank you.
This has been Greg Thompson with Regina Bailey, candidate for District C in the Iowa City Council. I'm here with Dean Shannon, the candidate for District C, Iowa City Council, to ask him our 5 questions today. Dean, thanks for coming by today.
Well, you're welcome. Glad I could be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. So our first question is, would you support a city ordinance directing city staff not to cooperate in enforcing provisions of the Patriot Act that may violate a citizen's civil liberties, as has been done in other cities like Arcata, California?
I'm not really up exactly to speed on the Patriot Act. I've heard things, and none of them were good. And no, I'm not comfortable with that particular act. And legally, I would probably go along with something like that if it's legal. I wouldn't want our directive staff to do something that was illegal. But if the legal staff would go along with this, yeah, I think that anything we can do to diminish this act, I would think that would be a good idea.
Okay, thank you. And our second question, are you happy with the process that has been used to grant some of the recent tax increment financing districts by the Iowa City Council?
Well, I'm on the Planning and Zoning Commission, so I know a little bit more than some people. Some people don't understand exactly what happens. They think that the school system is losing money, which they're not. My understanding is that it's a good tool to promote redevelopment, and we have some areas that could use redevelopment. And I think that for the most part, from what I can see, what we've approved in planning and zoning, it's been used fairly well. Now, time will tell if it was good. There's some controversy about offering it to the Sycamore Mall. I don't know that. I think that Sycamore Mall has really came back, and like the old Wardway came back, and we have some other areas that really need this, and we have those areas in the TIF district. So I'd like to see all those areas be redeveloped and come back. So in answer to your question, I think that so far it's been used wisely.
Okay. In planning for future city budgets, would you favor increasing the amount of money spent for bicycle and pedestrian trails by reducing funding for road building?
Well, that's probably an unfair question because I bicycle 12 months out of the year, and I use it for transportation, but I'm not a bicycle nut. I just enjoy riding my bicycle, and I think we've started very well with the bicycle trails, and I think there are plans to continue that. So I think that it would be worth a while. It's this town has too many cars in the streets as it is, and I don't know if making the streets wider is going to make it better. So the big thing is trying to encourage people to ride their bicycles and alternative transportation. And so I would like to see more trails if it's possible.
Okay, thank you. And the final question. Many people say that in Iowa City, political labels like radical, progressive, liberal, moderate, or conservative mean something different from what they mean elsewhere in Iowa. Which of these terms best describes your political philosophy and why?
Well, I'm at times all of those things, I think. But I guess if I was to narrow it down, I would have to say I'm a moderate, because I'd look at every angle. I'm not for one particular spectrum over another, because at times being conservative, and other times I would feel maybe a liberal label. So I think on the averaging it out, I would say probably a moderate would probably be the best thing for me.
All right, thanks for being with us today, Dean.
Well, thanks for asking me over here.
All right. I'm here with Bob Elliott, candidate at large for the Iowa City Council. Bob, thanks for coming in.
Thank you for asking. I appreciate it.
Good. So we've got our 5 questions here, and I'll just get started.
Sounds good.
Would you support a city ordinance directing city staff not to cooperate enforcing provisions of the Patriot Act that may violate a citizen's civil liberties, as has been done in other cities like Arcata, California?
No. I don't think we can pick and choose which, particularly of federal or state laws, we can acknowledge and which we can't. I think laws, it's interesting because Harold Hughes, the former governor of Iowa, said one of the best ways to get rid of a bad law is to enforce it. And I think there's a little good philosophy there. Sometimes it may cause more hurt, but I think if it's a federal law, it's a federal law, and we have to enforce it.
Okay.
I wouldn't go out of our way to do it, but I think if push comes to shove, that's the law. And we are a nation of laws.
All right.
That doesn't mean we agree.
Right. Okay. Our second question, are you happy with the process that's been used to grant some of the recent tax increment financing districts by the Iowa City Council?
Yes, boy, these first two questions have been kind of open and shut for me. Yes, I think they've been done very well. Could they be done better? I suspect, but I think if the proof is in the pudding, Iowa City is a better place because of the way they have been used. And I think every time you do something, you find a way to do it better the next time. So I'm hoping that will be the case, but I think Iowa City has used TIFs quite judiciously, and I would anticipate it will continue.
In planning for future city budgets, would you favor increasing the amount of money spent for bicycle and pedestrian trails by reducing funding for road building?
No. Would I consider altering the formula? Yes, but I'm not ready to say absolutely I would decrease funds for streets, increase for bicycle trails. I took a tour of Parks and Recreation Department facilities and grounds last Friday, I believe it was. And we have a number of excellent hiking, walking, jogging, bicycle trails. And in the reasonably near future, they're going to be connected, and they're going to provide a very strong trail system in Iowa City. But I think we still have to be aware, in Iowa City, if we want to be the vigorous community we are, we need to be attractive and attract people from West Branch and Wellman and Kelowna and Hills and Lone Tree and Ainsworth and Solon and all around. And those people are not going to ride bicycles here. They're going to drive vehicles. So we have to accommodate both, I should not say both, I should say all, pedestrians, bikers, and people who drive motor vehicles.
All right.
We must look out for all of them.
And our final question, many people say that in Iowa City, political labels like radical, progressive, liberal, moderate, or conservative mean something different than what they mean elsewhere in Iowa.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Which term best describes your political philosophy and why?
Well, let me just respond to the first part of that, because that's very interesting. Just the other day, I was mentioning, I think, to one of the other candidates, that I lived in Washington, Iowa for 5 years. Worked on the newspaper there, small daily newspaper in a small town. In Washington, I was viewed as a rather flaming liberal. And people used to laugh and say, oh, that's just Elliott and his wild ideas. I moved to Iowa City, and a year or two ago, one of the newspapers called me, I forget which one it was, about some issue. And I said, I'm flattered that you called, but why did you? And they said, well, we wanted to talk to a conservative Republican. And I said, God, I'm a lifelong Democrat. I always thought I was liberal. But yes, those labels, which are so often misleading, are certainly different in Iowa City than, say, in Washington, and they'd be different all over the country. The label, the second part of the question, which I think most appropriately identifies me, would be moderate. I think of myself in so many areas as taking the middle ground. I can so often understand and see the ideas and the thoughts and the concerns of people on both sides of a question. Now, some people might say, well, that just means you can't make up your mind. And I think, no, it means that I understand both sides, but I think somewhere in between there is usually a common ground. And so I like the term moderate. I think that describes my approach to local politics better than any of the others.
All right. Thanks for coming and talking with us.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. As I said the other day, it's this campaign is rather nice. People like you ask me questions and actually listen to what I have to say. And you nod as though it's reasonably knowledgeable or intelligent. So I appreciate that.
All right.
Greg, thanks a lot for asking. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Reasonably.
I'm here with Brandon Ross, at-large candidate for City Council, to ask him our 5 questions. Thanks for coming in, Brandon.
Thank you.
And I'll just go right to it. Would you support a city ordinance directing city staff not to cooperate in enforcing provisions of the Patriot Act that may violate a citizen's civil liberties, as has been done in other cities like Arcata, California?
Yes, I would definitely support that and uphold the Constitution. Sure.
As far as thinking of city workers, library workers, police, could you elaborate a little?
Well, yeah, I mean, well, definitely our public library has already decided to not cooperate with giving out information of private borrowers, and I think that was the right way to go. Yeah, I don't think that in general the Patriot Act, I think, is an infringement on our natural civil liberties, and I just think that we should show support for the Constitution by not accepting that.
Okay, thank you. Our second question, are you happy with the process that has been used to grant some of the recent tax increment financing districts by the Iowa City Council?
Well, I'm critical of some of the tax increment financing. I actually wonder about that we gave, for instance, a $6 million tax break to somebody who is very wealthy, and wondering why we had to grant that much. I mean, the tax increment financing comes from our funding, and it comes from education, and comes from the county and the city funds. I think we should be careful with that. I think that we have given some tax break to people like small businesses, like the bakery up on Summit Street that's going in there, and other small businesses. It seems less risky when you give those kinds of tax and breaks and incentives for business, and I would like to encourage small business. But, you know, there was also work done in the Sycamore Mall area, and I think that the project could have already been done without the tax increment financing. In fact, it was agreed upon to do, and the same thing holds true with United Foods building a warehouse. I don't see that we needed to give that company a tax increment financing. I think it's kind of I think it's fashion of late to give a lot of these. Meanwhile, these businesses would be in Iowa City anyway.
Okay. In planning for future city budgets, would you favor increasing the amount of money spent for bicycle and pedestrian trails by reducing funding for road building?
Yeah, I would. I think that, you know, with all the young legs that we have in Iowa City, I don't know what the percentage is, but it's a college town, it's a university town, and I think that these people can can commute by bicycle. If we have a comprehensive plan, then what's going to happen is you're going to get you're going to have less traffic, and you'll have to build fewer ugly parking amenities, and you know, which benefits everybody, not just the bicyclists, but people who have to drive through Iowa City because they're not going to be riding a bicycle. So I think that if we put in a comprehensive bicycle plan, which is something that I do want to do, that we'll be able to, you know, solve a lot of these city problems and make, you know, and save tax money while doing it. It's a lot cheaper to put in a bicycle route than it is to, you know, build more ugly parking ramps in the place of maybe what might be historic buildings of downtown.
Okay. And our final question. Many people say that in Iowa City, political labels like radical, progressive, liberal, moderate, or conservative mean something different than what they mean elsewhere in Iowa. Which of these terms best describes you, your political philosophy, and why?
Probably radical, progressive, liberal, moderate, and conservative. All of those terms probably have something to do with me. I am for neighborhood development in a more traditional way, as opposed to building suburban sprawl and housing tracts. Although to some that may seem like a radical idea, being able to build a neighborhood like Northside neighborhood where you have all the amenities, including grocery store and places to meet, pubs, bookstores, and things like that, shops, focal point. That really is a cherished 100-year-old plan that really flourished in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, and was cut back in the 50s when the Highway Act went through with President Eisenhower. I think that, you know, in that sense, in some ways, I'm a traditionalist because I really adhere to a traditional sense of community. Some people, you know, because I talk neighborhoods a lot, you know, they call me Mr. Rogers or think that I'm talking about Mayberry RFD. But, you know, a lot of people like to watch Mayberry RFD, and it's just because it actually shows us a lot of places we no longer have. And it's the same thing with you know, Disney World creates these cities which people like to go to, and most people actually, they did a study. How much of their time do they spend actually on the rides in Disney World? Well, it's only 3%. And the rest of the time is spent walking around the community that is built, which is a fantasy community. Well, it's only the same kind of community that we had for a long period of time. By comparison, the suburban community that we developed is fairly short-lived. So as far as radical, I don't know, maybe that seems like a radical idea. I would say that, I don't know, I'm a Democrat. I would say I'm an FDR Democrat, which to some people these days might consider it socialism or something. But I really believe in those things that protect people and give them services, education, transportation, and really support making a community and not just building isolated areas and not taking care of its people.
All right. Thanks for being on with us, Brandon.
Thank you.
Here with Steve Soboroff, candidate for City Council at large. We're going to ask him our infamous 5 questions here. Thanks for being here, Steve.
Thank you very much.
And our first question is, would you support a city ordinance directing city staff not to cooperate in enforcing provisions of the Patriot Act that may violate a citizen's civil liberties, as has been done in other cities like Arcata, California?
I don't like the Patriot Act. But the fact of the matter is, a lot of the laws that are now under the umbrella of the Patriot Act have existed for some time, since the late 40s, and we really should have done something about it then. That being said, I don't think it's up to I as a city councilor to direct anybody against their conscience to disobey the law. If you want to change the law, you should really work through your representatives, Leach and Harkin and Grassley, to do something about the law or to repeal the law. So I can't tell a city employee who may be in favor of that, you have to disobey a federal law.
Okay. Are you happy with the process that has been used to grant some of the recent tax increment financing districts by the City Council?
I think it's been excellent. I think we have a lot to show for it. We have Sycamore, we have Gateway. They're going to work on well, it's not Pepperidge, but
Pepperwood.
Pepperwood.
Yes.
I think it's working out well. You've got to keep in mind that the property's still being taxed. The schools, despite anything anyone misunderstands, still getting the money. It's just getting the money at the present rate. In the interim, you're giving these developers time to get up and go. You're going to get the money. You're going to get the tax. It is a loan that is extremely effective. It is used by other cities, and it provides growth. And so I'm very happy, and I think the President City Council, for the most part, has handled it extremely well. There's a lot of qualifications that the developer has to live by. It's not just a blanket go at it and save money, but you have to understand this property is still paying taxes.
In planning for future city budgets, would you favor increasing the amount of money spent for bicycle and pedestrian trails by reducing funding for road building?
No, we have bicycle trails. Bicycles are individuals. What we need, and what my campaign is focused on, is business growth, be it industrial, be it merchandising, retail, business growth. We've got to look at the scheme of things. Yes, this is a college town, but it's made up of people with families, and families need cars for transportation. Winter is hard here. They need to get to work on time. Housing developments bring in more families, that bring in property taxes. Roads are extremely important. We have bike trails, and I most certainly support bike trails, but first and foremost in my mind is getting the family to and from.
All right. Our final question. Many people say that in Iowa City, political labels like radical, progressive, liberal, moderate, or conservative mean something different than what they mean elsewhere in Iowa. Which of these terms best describes your political philosophy and why?
I'd like to say a realist, if not a moderate or conservative. I am a realist. We have some great social programs here. We've got great bike trails. We've got public access and cable and a wonderful library, but it takes business. There's not one charity that muscular dystrophy or cerebral palsy that isn't supported to a large extent by big business, by corporations. A corporation is just, it's made up of normal citizens that buy into a company. That's what it is. It shouldn't be vilified. Business pays for the emergency housing project. It contributes to the Salvation Army. It contributes to the Crisis Center and Table to Table. We need strong business here if we want these social programs to exist in this ridiculous climate where the state and the federal government is taking it all. We really do need to grow that, and we have to consider that the property tax owner can't pay anymore. We need more of them to just exist at the level we're at now, because I, as a property tax owner, I can't afford any more city tax. I can't afford any more federal or state. You know, the people that, it's kind of like God saying, well, you had enough. I mean, yes, it's bad that they're taking the money from us, but maybe we have had enough. Maybe we've wasted some, and wasted some opportunities that now we'll have to get creative with.
All right, thanks for coming and talking with us.
Thank you very much.
I'm here today with Dee Vanderhoff, at-large candidate for the Iowa City City Council, to ask her our 5 questions here, and we'll get started with the first question, Dee. The first question is, would you support a city ordinance directing city staff not to cooperate in enforcing provisions of the Patriot Act that may violate a citizen's civil liberties, such as has been done in other cities like Arcata, California?
This is one of those tricky questions, but when I take office, I am swearing to live by the laws of the land, which does not mean that I always agree with every law of the land. So as you've seen with the library, they have notified the public in every way they possibly can that this is happening, but they are abiding by the federal law at this point in time. And I think that's what I have to continue to do. Certainly as an individual, I can notify my representatives and senators who have a vote on this of my feelings that certain things may need to be changed.
Okay.
Okay?
And our second question, are you happy with the process that has been used to grant some of the recent tax increment financing districts by the City Council?
Yes. All but one, I will say that I have agreed with. I sit on the Council Economic Development Committee, and it's certainly a high interest of mine. What I see that we have done over the last few years is we have used 0.6 of 1%, putting them into short-term TIF packages. The package includes a contract that says you must increase the value of the property by a certain amount before you're even eligible for any rebate of your taxes. Sometimes they're tied to jobs, and they definitely are short-term. They are 7 years or less. The one that I did not agree with is a long-term project for the 64-1A project. It is a project that is in line to get dollars up front to help develop the project. And in most cases, I don't think that's the way we should go with TIF dollars, because it meant that the city will bond for those dollars so the developer has them up front to develop the project. The other thing that I look at when I look at TIF districts is how environmentally sound they are, what they do for a neighborhood. I'll give you specific on Sycamore Mall is a project that I think that space needed redevelopment for the good of the neighborhood, and that is both in reuse of city infrastructure, our roads, our streets, our bus system, and I think it makes it a walkable place to do shopping. I think it is a place for starter jobs for young people who can get there without having to have transportation or can get there on the bus. I think it is a second job opportunity for perhaps for some workers, and retail jobs are not notoriously high paying, but as a starter job and as a secondary income, they certainly can help families and keep families busy in their neighborhood.
The fourth question today, in planning for future city budgets, would you favor increasing the amount of money spent for bicycle pedestrian trails by reducing funding for road building?
That's a two-pronged question. I have been a large proponent of trails and putting them in conjunction with roads. But back in my Parks and Recreation days, I had an ongoing discussion, shall we say, with the first committee, which came first, the trails that connected our neighborhoods and our schools and our neighborhood shopping areas, or whether the spine, as they called it, the major river trail. I think I have supported a good balance of both of those over the years. I have just proposed another project that I saw in Ames, one that they were reclaiming the rock quarries north of the city and incorporating them into trails and park-like area. They did it with Vision Iowa and a bond issue to develop that one. And so we're looking at a similar extension of the river trail, and now with Gilbert Street extension and Mormon Trek extension across the river, we're right there at our sand pits that are nearing their lifespan. So that's a future. But yes, I support the trail. I still support using some of the hotel motel tax dollars specifically for Parks and Recreation, so they have additional dollars. I also work on national transportation and infrastructure, so I've spent the last 2.5 years working at the national level on the reauthorization of T21, which is where our money comes for all of our transportation systems, whether it be transit, streets, rail, trails, whatever.
All right. And our final question, Many people say that in Iowa City, political labels like radical, progressive, liberal, moderate, or conservative mean something different than what they mean elsewhere in Iowa. Which one of these terms best describes your political philosophy and why?
If you balance me out, I'm a moderate. When it comes to parks and recreations, amenities, I would say I'm progressive. When it comes to budget, I'm very conservative. And sometimes those clash in the philosophies and give me a headache, probably.
Dee, thanks a lot for coming in and talking with us today.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks. We're back live in the studio here. Sorry, we're having some technical difficulties with the tape freezing up on us, so hopefully it's an equal opportunity glitch. We'll try to fix it for our replay anyway. I also should mention, originally there were 5 questions. For time, we had to edit it down to 4, so that's why you see some editing on the tape. I did have to edit Dee Vanderhoff just a little bit for length. Sorry, Dee. So anyway, for this 8th candidate, we're here in the studio with Karen Pease, and she'll be facing Ross Wilburn in the District A.
A primary?
So-
A election.
Yeah, in the election. Thanks for coming in, Karen.
Thank you for having me.
And I'll ask you the same 4 questions that we just saw the other candidates answer. Would you support a city ordinance directing city staff not to cooperate in enforcing provisions of the Patriot Act that may violate a citizen's civil liberties, as has been done in other cities like Arcata, California?
Well, I'm a member of the Bill of Rights Defense Committee, which is the organization that introduced this in the first place. And I believe that's, it's important for the city to realize, we can't pass things that are out of our jurisdiction. However, as people who actually reviewed this ordinance would notice, that the fact that the ordinance focused specifically on things that are within our jurisdiction, focused on having the police make regular reports to the city about how the Patriot Act is being used within the city. One of the provisions would require the library to post notices that the U.S. government can subpoena your library records without you being aware of it, what books you're reading. In fact, the library actually implemented that one on their own, so we didn't need the city council for that. So they're all things under our jurisdiction. I am in support of it. I would have, for a compromise, been definitely willing to send it to the voters on a referendum and have the voters see what they say for it. Because I support open government. I think it's important that people have the right to vote on things that they want to happen, and I think it's a very good thing.
Okay. And our second question, are you happy with the process that has been used to grant some of the recent tax increment financing districts by the City Council?
Well, we have some very good TIF guidelines. Unfortunately, the guidelines are somewhat seldom used to their full extent. We're supposed to require certain wages, benefits, environmental standards, et cetera, from companies. And unfortunately, that hasn't been put into effect too much. Also, there is the fact that we have to look at what sort of TIFs we're giving to companies and what the payback is going to be. If we don't require the company to give the things that they promise to us, well, then we might well shortchange ourselves. And also when you look at some TIFs, for example, retail TIFs, which also tend to be among the worst benefits, wages, etc., they also would have the least effect overall in the city because there's a fairly fixed retail demand in the city. You have to listen to laws of supply and demand, and there's a certain number of people that are going to spend so much, so if we try and encourage retail in one spot, we're just going to be taking it from another spot, and in the process giving away a lot of tax dollars, most of which are the school district's tax dollars. So I think it's important that we try and make sure that whatever TIFs we give are going to be socially responsible and are going to be ones that are actually going to help the city overall.
Great. The third question, in planning for future city budgets, would you favor increasing the amount of money spent for bicycle and pedestrian trails by reducing funding for road building?
Definitely. I went through most of the summer, went around to different houses, asked people, what their concerns were in the city. I've got, a big list at home, and I'd like to try and get some of those marked off. One of the most common ones that came up was, concerns with the roads. We want fixing these potholes. We want sidewalks in these places. We want lights in this dark area. virtually no one said that we really need to spend more money trying to expand the city, trying to get a new commercial district for new car lots, or things like that, which is, the sort of things we can expect around the Mormon Trek extension. I think it's more important that we spend our efforts improving what we already have instead of trying to expand. And one good thing that we can do with that is to increase bicycle and trails, things like that.
Great. And our final question. Many people say that in Iowa City, political labels like radical, progressive, liberal, moderate, or conservative mean something different than what they mean elsewhere in Iowa. Which of these terms best describes your political philosophy and why?
Well, if you ask someone who's on the council, the vast majority of people will say, I'm a moderate. And there's something wrong with that because it's hard to classify everyone who's on there as moderate when there's such a wide variety of opinions. I come from a rather conservative background. My father is actually a vice president of an oil company and Republican family. On the other hand, I've gone myself to embrace some more progressive policies. But I still think it's important that we, not demonize businesses, but on the other hand, try and do our best to help the poor and the less fortunate in the city. I think it's important that we try and keep a balance on everything.
Great. Thanks for coming in and talking with us, Karen.
Thank you.
All right. All right, we're going to go back to our final taped interview of Ross Wilburn, who Karen will be running against in the upcoming election. So let's go ahead and run that. I'm here with Ross Wilburn today, a candidate for District A. We're going to ask him our 5 questions. Thanks for being with us, Ross.
You bet.
The first question is, would you support a city ordinance directing city staff not to cooperate in enforcing provisions of the Patriot Act that may violate a citizen's civil liberties, as has been done in other cities like Arcata, California?
I would not support that. I disagree with the Patriot Act. My main problem with the Patriot Act is that there's too much allowed without judicial oversight. Now, having said that, I'm not going to put a clerk in one of the offices. I'm not going to put someone at the library in the position of violating the law. Like it or not, it is the law, and it does come close to, I think, putting us in danger with crossing a line with some civil liberties. But the way we do that is we change the laws, and we go to the people that make those laws to do those changes. So there's a group that's trying to tie it to, some local things where we do have jurisdiction, like the library. The library's made some changes down there in terms of letting the public know that their information may be, that they may not have control over the information that's released, and I support the library doing that. But I really think it's important to go to, our senators, our congressional people, to take that action. But I'm not going to put someone, in Iowa City in jeopardy in something that they may or may not agree with, but I don't want to, as a council member, put them in that position.
Okay. And our second question, are you happy with the process that has been used to grant some of the recent tax increment financing districts by the Iowa City City Council?
I support the use of tax increment financing with performance standards, and that's what we've done. We've tended to make them shorter term. We've also asked that we've looked at the wages, we've looked at the number of jobs, we've looked in some cases they have to have a certain number of full-time jobs with benefits in a certain deadline, whether it's a year or 2 years. And so those are performance standards. Without them meeting those performance standards, they do not get the tax break. The other thing is that it is, in the case of tax increment financing, without an increase in the value and following the other performance standards, there's no tax break. They continue to pay taxes on the current property. It's the value of the increased improvement where there's taxes. There's been a concern about whether or not, and I think that there's more of a concerned focus, I think, with some folks on the retail TIFs that are done. In the case of Sycamore Mall, people on my side of town, the east side of town, a lot have come to me concerned with, I think they are pleased with the rebirth of the Sycamore Mall. Regardless of that, so far it's been a positive thing in my opinion. just looking at the traffic and the increased volume and activity, both business and recreational cultural activities out there. But Iowa City needs to continue to shop there, as well as downtown and other parts of Iowa City to help out small business owners and some of those larger businesses. But the public will have a lot to say about the continued success of that.
Okay, thank you. In planning for future city budgets, would you favor increasing the amount of money spent for bicycle and pedestrian trails by reducing funding for road building?
I think we've done a good job at trying to increase trails. In fact, I'm thinking of the South Side Trail, continuing the growth of the Iowa River Corridor Trail over by the southeast side where I live off of Gilbert there. We've done a good job tying in some more trails to that. And we've got an ongoing plan. Money that's used for the roads and the trails comes from the road use tax, and it's striking a balance with trying to take advantage of some opportunities. I'll continue to strike that balance and continue to invest in trails, so yes.
Okay, and our final question. Many people say that here in Iowa City, political labels like radical, progressive, liberal, moderate, or conservative mean something different than what they mean elsewhere in Iowa. Which of these terms best describes your political philosophy and why?
I suppose most folks say that I'm moderate. I am a Democrat. The thing that I don't like about those labels, it's difficult when we're young. We grow up learning how to categorize things. But I think as adults, especially in the political arena, what that tends to do, as soon as I give you a label, then I can discount anything that you have to say. So I'd rather talk about issues, but most folks would say I'm a moderate. You tell me. I'm pro-choice. I believe until men learn how to bear children, I'll continue to be pro-choice. I believe in affirmative action. Those are things that folks would say tend to make me more liberal or progressive. In terms of the role that the city plays, and I think that goes back to your first question about where we should take formal action on probably broader or national issues. I think it's a question of role, and I've never said that those broader national things don't affect us locally, because they do. But I think it's, and I've used my informal role as a council member to try and, to use the title to talk to some of our people in Washington, D.C. I expressed my concerns about the war in Iraq, and more so about post-Iraq, about the lack of planning or just questionable judgment in terms of what was used to justify the war and what's used to continue efforts there. There's some local groups that don't believe in pro-choice views, and I don't believe that's something. Again, we're part-time legislatures. We don't have direct responsibility for family health, that type of thing. So I don't think that's something that the council should be deciding formally. Now, informally, again, I think there's, and I've participated in different ways, whether it's youth, some transportation type things, to try and help advocate. And I think that's where our informal role. And some folks would say that would make me more moderate, even conservative. So, but I'm comfortable with where I'm at, and I think that's. I hope the voters will respect that. My views and the care with which I use to try and decide where to take action.
All right. Thanks for being with us today, Ross.
You bet.
All right, we're back in the studio. Sorry to our viewers for those technical glitches. We'll see if we can get that corrected for the replay. Our show today is called Other Questions for Council Candidates. I'm here with Stephen Canner, who's a member of Iowa City News Collective, also outgoing city councilor. He's moving away, so he's not running for re-election. Stephen, thanks for being on.
Good to be here.
So we've just heard the answers to some questions that I designed, and I think we had quite a variety of answers. Some definite no's, some definite yeses, and a little bit of waffling here and there. What did you think after viewing these tapes?
Well, first, I appreciate your questions that you ask. I think it did draw some distinctions. It's hard in this town, which is a status quo kind of town. We have a pretty good status quo, and we have a pretty good financial base with the university. So in those kind of towns, it draws people towards the middle. Everyone's going to go with the way things are going, which are pretty good for the most part. And we have people working for high standards. So when you try to differentiate people, it's hard. I think your questions did bring out some points that we could see. For instance, the Patriot Act question about whether or not you would pass something similar to the Arcadia City Council, which would instruct staff not to cooperate as much as possible with enforcement of the Patriot Act. I think we saw that there are people who say the law is the law. But the reality is, as we know, is there's things that we enforce and don't enforce. We don't enforce the speed limit 100%. So sometimes it's okay to go over the speed limit and you won't get a ticket. And I think it's the same way with the issue of constitutional rights. The law is a fluid thing. We have the right to enforce things more or less. And you saw candidates like Dean Shannon and Bob Elliott, and I think Dee Vanderhoff and Steve Sobroff and Ross Wilburn give what I would consider typical sort of to the right answers about the law is the law in this case. Other cases they don't say that. So you can see a clear difference, whereas the so-called progressive candidates, Brandon Ross, Karen Peace, and Regina Bailey, were much more open to pushing the envelope. And so it's a fine line, but you can see some differences there, especially on that question, I think.
Yeah. What about the way the candidates classified themselves as far as moderate, liberal? What did you think about those answers?
Well, again, it's this is a town it's in the middle, and we have someone like Bob Elliott who's very good at trying to sound like a moderate. And that, of course, marginalizes anyone to the left. We had a national movement beginning with Reagan that would marginalize anyone that was in the middle. Our so-called liberals would be middle of the road most anywhere in Europe and throughout the world. We're way behind in employee rights and in health care issues. And so anyone, because of this movement that began in the 80s, anyone that talks about these issues in a progressive stance is labeled as extreme left, and then those who are to the right are labeled as moderate. That was the success of the Reagan Revolution, I would say the biggest success that's really actually hurt our country. So we have people like Bob Elliott who talk about stopping the citizen initiative process or citizen referendum, where citizens can put something on the ballot if they're not satisfied with their representatives doing the job and not talking to the issues. So Bob Elliott came to City Council and said, let's do away with it, it's too cumbersome. And you had Ross Wilburn, who got into some discussion about where he is classified, who doesn't want to talk about certain issues at the City Council level. He thinks it takes too much time. And
what kind of issues would that be?
Well, he was talking about pro-choice issues or Anti-Patriot Act issues. He says that's, even though he has concerns about them one way or the other, it's not up to the City Council to discuss, where I think some of the progressive candidates are saying, let's talk about them, let's get the community involved. And it's our place to talk about it. I think that's a progressive, proactive, in touch with the community kind of stance. And that's some of the conflict that we have here, I think, among the candidates.
I saw a contrast in the answers on my question about the tax increment financing process. And my question says, are you happy with the process? And I know that some of these meetings to enact these tax increment financing districts have been special meetings, not during regular council sessions. And also I've sensed that companies seem to be sort of blackmailing the city and other cities and saying, if you don't grant this, we won't develop, we won't spend more, we won't build another factory or another office here. What do you think about the process that's been used to enact these TIFs?
Well, personally, as a person that was out of town when one of these meetings were called at the last moment, I think it's a pretty horrendous process, and the council needs to put a stop to it, and we need to have council members saying, no, this is wrong. You didn't hear Ross Wilburn or Dee Vanderhoff saying, no, let's hold off. These things are rushed through. In many ways, it is a federal problem because you have one city in one part of the country competing against another city and giving away their taxpayers' money and giving millions to millionaires, as one of the candidates has said. And that's not our job as city council members. There's a better way to do it. TIFs originally in the state of Iowa were only to be for blighted areas, and because of lobbying efforts of special interest groups, it got expanded to so-called economic development. And so it's gotten way out of whack. What's interesting is Dee Vanderhoff, she was against the latest TIF because she didn't happen to like the project that was going on to 6401A, the Moen project. In general, she is for that. Bob Elliott it's kind of scary when he comes up before City Council, or he wrote a letter, an op-ed piece actually, that says it's bad for council members to question businesses at these meetings about their finances. You know, a person on welfare gets more in-depth questioning than one of these multi-millionaire developers. And so you have Bob Elliott saying, let's cut back on the questioning. And again, a lot of it is process. How do they fall on process? And you see, I think throughout these questions, you see Regina Bailey and Brandon Ross and Karen Peace talking about a better process. And maybe that's part of the breakdown. Of course, I have my prejudice in who I'm looking at and how I'm hearing things.
And that brings us to our endorsements. At Iowa City Other News, we've decided collectively to endorse 3 candidates, the 3 candidates that you were just talking about: Karen Pease, Brandon Ross, and Regina Bailey.
Yes, the Iowa City's Other News is formally endorsing the 3 candidates that you just mentioned. In District C, we are endorsing Regina Bailey. In District A, we are endorsing Karen Pease. And in the large seat, we're endorsing only 1 candidate, even though there's 2 seats. That would be Brandon Ross. And want to emphasize that at the election date on November 4th, or if you vote early at a satellite station, that in the at-large seat, we recommend you vote only Brandon Ross, bullet voting as it's called, so as not to give support to one of the other candidates that might knock him off and move him out of the 2nd or 1st spot. And again, emphasize also that everybody in the city can vote for the district seats. Even though at the primaries you couldn't vote for them, everyone gets to vote for those positions.
Right.
One other thing I just want to emphasize, we have a collective here at Iowa City's Other News. There's 5 of us plus an intern at the current time, and we discussed our endorsement, and this is a group consensus on our endorsement of those candidates. We are an organization looking for things through a progressive eye, and that's what we're going to look for. That's part of our mission statement.
Right. Thanks a lot for your comments today, Stephen.
Thank you, Greg, for a good show and good questions.
Thank you. And thanks a lot to all the candidates who so graciously appeared. They were all very eloquent and cooperative. Thanks a lot. And please get out and vote. It's coming up November 4th? November 4th. Get out and vote. Your vote makes a big difference. For Iowa City Other News, this is Greg Thompson, and thanks to all of you out there for watching.
In falling all around, the grass lifts its head to the heavenly sound. Just a little rain, just a little rain. What have they done to the rain? Just a little boy standing in the rain, the gentle rain that falls for years, and the grass is gone, the boy disappears, and rain keeps falling like helpless tears. And what have they done to the rain? Just a little breeze out of the sky. The leaves pat their hands as the breeze blows by. Just a little breeze